And before I start, Malachi's going to help me on my slides because I had a little technical difficulties and things to start off. Thanks for having me out here today. I want to start to say that I normally teach about the Declaration of Independence, but the class is a little bit longer. I will be speaking on that at the Bartow Tea Party meeting next month on the 16th, so I encourage you guys to come out and hear me speak. Takes me a little while to warm up. I'm a little bit tight in things today here, but as I warm up, I get loose and stuff. I'm very passionate about this. Like Luce was saying, I'm author of Why Christians Can't Be Democrat, and I'm able to display that here today?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So those books are going to be on sale for $10. Some of the principles I talk about will be in that book and things like that. I like to have a fun time. I'm very interactive. There will be a Q&A afterwards, but if you just can't wait and you have to ask a question for clarity, go ahead and raise your hand. I will say when I speak at the Bartow Tea Party event with the Declaration of Independence, I like to play a lot of fun games and with color and things like that. So anyway, I decided I'm going to speak about a topic of government, it's not leadership, and it's a pet peeve of mine because all of us have heard stick and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Most of us heard that, right?
Yes, it's in the Internal Revenue Code.
Oh, excuse me too, I'm kind of like have itchy throat syndrome today for whatever reason. But all of those who've heard that, when we've grown up, how many realize that that was a lie? Pretty much, right? Because words are very, very powerful. Yeah, I appreciate it. Words are very, very powerful, and they can be very hurtful. And so what I normally do is I like to talk about the philosophy of government. And before I start, I want to make explain there's a difference between politics and government. Most people believe they're one and the same. Thank you very much. So a lot of my focus is on the concept of government, which came before politics, right? So government, to me, government is basically an institution or a concept in nature that gives you authority to implement, certain or enforce certain laws and things like that. Politics is just kind of the talk or whatever. So we have politicians who actually talk to get a seat in government. So they're really separate things, and that'll be a little bit more relevant, evident a little bit later. Can you hit the next slide for me, please? So I'm Michael Thomas, I'm with Harriet Tubman, and if it looks familiar, that came from Harriet Tubman. But I'm not a woman, so I have to go with Harriet. So Harriet Tubman said that she freed 1,000 slaves, and she could have freed 1,000 more if she could have convinced them that they were slaves. So my goal is to convince people that they're slaves in 2013 and going forward, so they can, get independence and things like that. Most people think slavery is chattel slavery, where I got chains and bonds on me or whatever, but now we are in indentured slavery, right? In slavery of the mind or whatever, where we have to actually go work for the government and things like that in our paychecks. So my organization is to free slaves, encourage more people to be politically active, and more minorities and young people to become politically active, because we've gotten too far away from that. Next slide, please. All right, so again, my favorite topic is the Declaration of Independence. I speak on a lot of different things. This is my favorite. This is my favorite man-made document in the world because it explains everything. And again, if you come see me on the 16th, I'll go over some of those concepts. I'll go over a couple today, but this is really important. And before I go with this famous 2 sentences, for those who have a piece of paper or pen or can remember, I came up with something called the freedom formula. The freedom formula is that our natural state is freedom when we're born, right? So you have freedom, then you have government, which is force. It only operates out of force. It has to operate out of force to comply so we can meet laws, right? So you have freedom and you have force, right? So if you want to be free for God's freedom, you have to remove any force in between your freedom that God has given you and yourself. So my freedom formula is basically big G minus little g equals F. And that means God minus little g, government, equals freedom. So the more government we have, which is force, is opposite of freedom everywhere in the universe, right? Nowhere in the universe can freedom and force operate in the same space at the same time. So where you have freedom and you have force, it removes freedom. Another way to write the freedom formula is G minus M equals F. M stands for man. Mankind is the only species in the universe that can remove your freedom. So the more people you have in your life that tries to remove your authority or freedom is a threat to your freedom. No other species can do that. So a couple of ways to write that. So my favorite phrase, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governor. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about that freedom formula real quick and the concept of leadership. And my goal here today is to explain what leadership is and is not, and the danger of calling government our president leadership. My biggest pet peeve, and I hear it every day, regardless of political affiliation, is our leaders in government. Our president's the leader. And like I say, words are very, very, very powerful. And I'll show you that. And again, going over a couple concepts, talking about the freedom formula and the leadership, I'm going to jump right here to that all men are created equal. Most people believe that means equal access, equal opportunity, and things like that, but it actually comes from the concept of the divine rights of kings. During that time period, most people believe kings were sent by God to rule over them. And specifically in the Declaration, we're talking about King George III, right? So, if the king represents government, which represents force, and God sends the king, that puts the freedom of God followed by the force of the king or government and down to the people. So the authority flowed from God to the king to the people, right? So that's a contradiction to the freedom formula already, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so the divine rights of kings. Prior to the Declaration of Independence, most people believe God sent the king and the king ruled over the people. So again, this formula will be G, big G over little g, and then the people, right? Now, what does all men created equal really mean? It means that as a person, as a man, we are all created equal together under God. So I got a nice little display here. Malachi's going to hit that for me. All men are created equal. All men are created equal. So King George, as a man, is created equal. He still have the title of king and government, but in our declaration it says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So what the Declaration of Independence did is actually, on the next slide, that Malachi's going to hit for me, it reduced the concept of government beneath the people. Now, you see this lines up with the freedom formula, where now, your source of freedom of God, there's no force in between now. God is the source of all authority. God gives us power, authority. It flows through us. Then we establish or institute a government, which means that the authority flows from the people to the government, right? This is how it's supposed to work. Now, when it happened, amazing things happened. And in our Constitution, we have where the government protects our creative thoughts and patents and things like this. We have no person, no King George III, in between what God has granted us in terms of endowment with rights and talents and gifts, robbing us of those things now. And matter of fact, the role of the king and the role of government is to protect our natural rights from God. So that's really the proper role of government. Now, if you look at this thing is all about authority. Everything I talk about is the concept of authority, where the source of the authority comes from and how it flows. So again, in the picture, all authority comes from God. It passes to us as individuals, and we give authority to government to protect our rights from God. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is what I call the proper order. God created man, man instituted government. The government is to protect our natural rights from God. This is the proper order, and we've gotten away from that, right? This means that delegation, the word DE, the preface of DE in delegation, it means down our way. So when we delegate, or we debate, or we demean, it means down our way. So if we delegate, all authority is delegated top to bottom, right? So if you're in a company and you have a CEO, you don't delegate to the CEO. He or she delegates to you. The authority, the hierarchy flows downward. So this means that if we delegate to the government, it means it's inferior to the people. right? Now, if you call government leadership, it means that we are in an inferior position to the government. And this is why I harp on, it's very important what we say and what's perceived. I'm just going to go back a little bit about myself. So I was raised a Democrat. Don't hate me for that. No, I'm just kidding. I was told as a child, when I questioned about political affiliation, I was told that Republicans are mean white men who only cared about their money and didn't care about me. And that Democrats cared about me. And I was told that by my parents. Those people loved me. And so I had no reason not to believe it, right? I love them. They have credibility. So I believed it. Words are very, very powerful. It only took until I was about 27 to start studying on my own to realize that they told me that because that's what they were told. It's called political affiliation, right? My dad went to Georgia Tech. His dad went to Georgia Tech. I'm going to go to Georgia Tech. That's how that happened. So again, words are very, very powerful. And so we got to be really clear, especially in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, to put the words in a proper perspective. Now, anyone familiar with the 1828 dictionary, Webster's 1828 dictionary? I don't know if you own a copy. I own a copy. Also, you know, it's expensive, but it's a beautiful, beautiful facsimile of that. And the importance of that dictionary is that if we want to understand what the founders were saying, we need to understand what the definitions were at that time. Now, what we've done now is we've changed definitions. We've watered down definitions, and when you water down definitions, you change meanings, you change perceptions, and perceptions are people's reality, right? So if you look in the 1828 dictionary and you look up the word marriage, it says between a man and a woman. So we don't have to be wondering or guessing what they meant by marriage. When we look at the right to bear arms and the word arms, what it means then, it means a weapon of offense or any weapon of defense. It didn't have to mention a musket or M16 or anything like that. So it's important that we understand and put in the proper context of these documents based on what was meant at that time. Now, I can say this. In our Constitution, and I know we all here love the Constitution. As a matter of fact, there's a preamble over there on that banner. Understand that you do not have to amend the Constitution to change it. All you have to do is change the perception and mentality of the people. So as much as that document is important, and I'll go over some of its the reason we have that, we don't have to have an amendment to change it. Matter of fact, it's changed every day. You heard the supremacy clause, right? And how it's being interpreted now. I'm going to say misinterpreted, right?
Yes.
Exactly. It's being misinterpreted.
Misinterpreted.
Right. So it's important that, and I'm here today to say, going forward, and I hope I convinced you, do not call the president, do not call government leadership. Because if you have a leader, you must have a follower. Right? And there's a difference between leadership and representation. In our Constitution, they mention representatives, representation. When someone represents you, and I'm going to have the definition up here, when someone represents you, you give them instructions. If someone's leading you, they give you instruction. So it completely changes the hierarchy. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about the president here. And this is the definition from the 1828 dictionary that applies to government. I got the whole definition here, so you didn't think I just made it up. We can just get out the parts that we want or whatever. Elected, appointed to preside over a corporation, company, or assembly of men. I'm just going to stop right there. The second definition, an officer appointed or elected to govern a province or territory, or the minister or government of a nation. Now, this is very important. I put those two definitions down for a reason. The first definition talks about a president, like we would see a president of some type of corporation. I'm the president of this division, and he's the president of this division. The president in the second one is the president in terms of government over a province or something like that. So what we've done is we've tried to make those synonymous terms. So we look at the president and say, oh, he's like a president of a company or a division. So therefore, he must preside and be the head of government. I went to the White House website yesterday to look at the definition about what the president's role is and things like that, and they said in there, head of government. So I'm like, wait a minute, where does it say head of government? Where does it say anywhere in our Constitution, the Declaration, any of our organic documents that the president is the head of government? And if anybody wants to maybe give me an example of why they think the president is leader, then let me know. It's not to challenge you, it's just to say I want to understand people's perception. But nowhere in our documents does it say the president is the head, our leader of the government. What it is that we've been told that so long in our lives, we just believed it. And we've never challenged it anyway. Right? So I'm going to go to show you how the president cannot be the leader, how government cannot be a leader, and I'm going to hope to prove that to you. So the president is not like the CEO of government. He presides over the executive branch of government, one of three branches at the federal level, right? Next slide, please. So executive, because he's the chief executive magistrate, right? Having the quality of executing and performing as an executive power of authority. Down here, an officer, whether king, president, or chief magistrate, who superintends the execution of the laws. He's not a chief executive officer as a CEO in the company. He presides over the executive branch, whose goal is to enforce laws passed by the legislative branch, right? He's within the federal government branch, not above it, right? Next slide, please. Magistrate. So I had to grab that out because in the previous definition it said that's part, chief executive magistrate. A public civil officer invested with the executive government of some branch of it. So this would apply to our federal government, our branch of our federal government, right? Not all of government. Okay, next slide, please. Last definition, or next to the last one, a minister. To act as a minister or chief agent in managing public affairs. And I'm going to jump all the way to the bottom. In short, to administer is to direct the execution of or application of laws. So the reason I put these definitions up here is because I pulled them right out of the Webster's 1828 dictionary. So you can see exactly what they meant. Nowhere did it say he's above government, the head of government, the leader of the people, or anything like that. So we got to be really careful in correcting people in a nice way, or challenging them to say, where did you learn that? And when I ask people, why do you think the president is the leader, or why do you think government's the leader? It's always the same answer. That's what they've been told. And we can go over some of that too, right? For instance, when he's introduced, I'm the president right now, right? Of course, thank you. When I'm introduced, what do they say? State of the Union address. Ladies and gentlemen, your commander-in-chief. They put a period at the end of that, right? So it gives the perception to people, he's our commander, he's our chief. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. So again, people's perception are their reality. He's our commander-in-chief, period, and that's all they say. But those who read the Constitution, there's no period after that. He's commander-in-chief of exactly. So he's not my commander-in-chief. I've never served. And when you're serving, he's your commander-in-chief. But these are the type of things that we keep being told as children as we grow up that make us believe it. Another term I absolutely hate is they call the wife first lady, the first family. In this case, they got the dog, and he's the first dog. Yeah, that's what they print. He's the first dog. So again, it's perception. So if they're the first, what does that make you?
The second.
You got to be the second. So I want to know, it's like, okay, if you're the first, what does that put me on the scale? Here's my wife, but she's like the 31st. Oh, where is she? And so words matter, perceptions matter, it's people's reality. So when we go around and keep calling these people the first, and we see this in our churches sometimes too, it implies that you're the second, or they're above you, right? Because if you run a race and you're first, that means you won, right? So it's very, very important. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what I have here is the hierarchy and separation of authority. Again, this whole thing's about authority. The founders realized the danger of having all authority in the hands of one man, in that case, King George III. And they had the 27 abuses of King George III. This is what happens when you give one man too much authority. So they gave us documents, they gave us a government that would divide that authority horizontally and vertically so that one person would not have all the power, and we're moving back into that scenario. And we're moving back into that scenario because, again, we're watering down words, we're changing perception, and we're calling them leaders instead of representation. So it's really, really important. So in our declaration, actually this is not even our declaration, this is kind of more of a history lesson. The declarations basically said God's the source of all authority. He endowed us, he created us, right? He blessed us with talents and gifts. That authority goes down to individual people. Rights go down to individual people. Rights are endowed to individuals, not couples, not organizations, not businesses. So, and to get off just a little bit, because I love this conversation, this topic, a right basically means that because it came from God, you do not have to ask permission of man prior to executing. So if I want to wave my hand, I don't have to ask permission from anybody, because it's my right. I can wiggle my left leg. It's my right. Now, if I went to Malachi, I just can't grab his hand and wiggle his hand. I have to ask permission. So that means it's a privilege. So a right and privileges are opposites of each other. Rights do not require permission, privileges do. So that being the case, there's no right to marriage. Because when you marry somebody, you have to ask permission, and they have to give consent. So marriage is really a two-way privilege. Make sense? There's no right to vote. Voting is a privilege because you have to ask, whether it's in the company, in your home, or whatever it is, you have to ask. So it's not your right to vote. And so what government has done, and I actually got a document, don't let me forget to pass this out, because I want to show you how over the time period we've changed the definition of things and how we're moving in the direction we're moving into. But government, because we've not challenged it, because we don't know, they've converted a lot of different things. They're trying to convert the concept of the definition of marriage. They've converted the concept of leadership versus representation. They converted the belief that voting is a right instead of a privilege, that marriage is a right instead of a privilege, that Obamacare, Affordable Health Care Act, is a right and not a privilege. Now we know it's not a right. They believe, that education is a right and not a privilege. You don't have a right to have someone educate you. You have a right to pursue an education. You don't have a right for somebody to pay for your education, right? It's all a privilege. But this is how they've manipulated the concept of rights and privileges to their benefit. And because we don't know, we can't challenge them. And because we don't know the difference between a right and a privilege, we're losing our rights. And I'll go more over that at the Tea Party meeting next month. It's really, really quite interesting. So a little history. God's the source of authority. He gives authority to individuals. Now, we always talk about the Constitution. We just say the Constitution, but there's several constitutions. Each state has a constitution. So when we say Constitution, what we really mean is the federal Constitution. But that doesn't address all the issues. That document is very, very short. It's short for a reason. It's because it tells the government what it can do versus what it cannot do. It's not the answer to all of our problems. It's there as a contract between the states and the federal government, like any other contract. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here, too. So we the people have a state constitution between us and the state. Now, with the little history lesson, which came first? The states, the chicken or the egg, right? Which came first? States or the federal government? States. States, right. So if you understand delegation and how authority flows, this is a proper hierarchy. Means that God gave us authority. We pass authority down to different governments. We have different levels of government. And the states passed authority down to the federal government. They created the Constitution, created the federal government, and they limited its powers with enumerated rights. Enumerated powers, I'm sorry. Get right side of my head. That means that the states created the federal government. And not only that, the president sits in the executive branch, which has less authority than the legislative branch. Right? So technically, if you understand how authority flows and how delegation flows, the federal branch of government is supposed to be, in terms of authority, it's the smallest, not the biggest. They may have a big jurisdiction, and we'll go over the difference between that. So where the president resides in the executive branch, which is the second biggest authority of that level, he's technically down here in terms of the hierarchy of how authority flows. But out of our ignorance, collective ignorance over time, we made that position the most powerful in the world. Everywhere you go, people are enamored by the president, taking pictures. So what they've done effectively is put him back in the position of King George III, believing he's sent from God, and they are actually inferior to him and holding him up And it's really the smallest authority in the world. Or not in the world, but in our system of government. And what amazes me more than anything is how presidents get out there and talk about all the things they're going to do if you vote for them or whatever. And I tell people, they can't promise you that because they can't make laws. It doesn't matter though, right? All that matters is that people's perception is their reality. So again, we need to check them and we need to call them on this. So again, if he's head of government, or he's the leader of us, and the leader of government, the leader of the United States, why does he have to ask for everything, for the most part? See, another reason why government cannot be leaders is because true leadership is someone you freely follow, not someone you're forced to follow, right? If I'm forced to follow you, that's not leadership, that's a dictatorship. And because government only operates out of force, which I say it must have to, then it cannot be leadership because leadership can never be forced. So people say, well, Mike, wait a minute, that's not forced because we have the freedom to vote to who to choose. I'm like, no. You have the freedom to choose who gets to use the force. That's what your vote really represents, right? And then you're forced to comply with any laws that are passed for 2 years. So the funny thing is, I hope everyone takes a trip to the bathroom before they leave, because on that wall, this is beautiful that this set up like this, it said leadership is action, not a position. It's very, very important. We've made it, because you're in government, by virtue of being in government, you're automatically a leader. And that's not true. Leadership is found within the person, not within the title. Now let me tell you what your title really represents. A title represents responsibility, jurisdiction, and power. So if we all have title, I'm a father. So my title as a father, I father. My jurisdiction is only over my kids. I can't father other people's kids. I just can't go to your kids and say, I'm a father, therefore your kids are under my jurisdiction. And I use the power God's given me to do what I need to do as a father to meet that responsibility. So leadership is a skill set within a person. A title represents jurisdiction, power, and authority. That makes sense? So we all have titles somewhere, whether you're a parent, whether you're a person, whether you're in a business somewhere, and that's the difference. So government, now I'm going to have you go back a couple of slides for me, because this is really important. Then we get back to this one. Let's go a couple more. Right there. Okay. Nowhere on that second line that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving the just power from consent of the government. Nowhere does it say that's leadership. What that says is that we give government enough authority per our consent to use their just powers, meaning they must be upright and moral powers, to defend or to protect, secure our natural rights from God. Now, we talked about titles. Government is a title. Government official is a title. Now we talk about the responsibility, right? The responsibility is to secure rights or protect rights that God has given us. We talked about jurisdiction. The jurisdiction is of the governed. And we talk about the power. The powers must be just. So government officials aren't leaders, they're protectors. If you look anywhere in the Bible, anyone heard the phrase, we should pay for our leaders in government? Anyone ever heard that phrase? I hear it all the time. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that government's leadership. Nowhere in the Bible does it say government or your provider. Nowhere does it say that. The Bible only references government the same way the founders reference government as authority. So we got a lot of people out there saying, the Bible says pray for our leaders in government. I'm like, find that phrase and can't ever find it. Again, just being told what to do. I haven't got any word out here yet. Okay, I'm going to have you fast forward a little bit. But this is important to understand. Leadership, jurisdiction, authority, and power are not one and the same. And we have a hard time as people separating them out, right? So you have the person and you have the title, and they're not necessarily one and the same. They both reside in the same person, but what they represent are totally different. Okay, go forward a little bit. We're going to go back to the other slide here. You know what? Oh, go back one, I'm sorry. Appreciate that. Representative. In legislative or other business, an agent, deputy, or substitute who supplies the place of another. Now, where in real life do we have representatives? We can think of somebody right now like an attorney or a lawyer, right? They represent us. They basically take a substitute or place of another. We can have representation in terms of, wills and things like that, or, living wills and things like that. When you have somebody represent you, you give them instruction. So the founders picked their words very, very carefully. They didn't just, just by happenstance. They understood what they were saying. Okay, the next slide. And I did a little graphic. In my book, I do a lot of pictures because it's easier to understand that than some of the words in your head. Representation, in terms of our Constitution, means that God gave us power, and that goes down to the government, and the government represents us, right? Represents the constituents. Leadership, like I mentioned before, means that government now is over the people. So be very careful with the words you use. Next slide, please. So, why should we care? Like I mentioned before, if people believe, I'm going to use Malachi here for example, if he's always told that government and the president is this leader, when it comes time for him to vote, he's not no longer voting for representation. He's voting for somebody to lead him. So he's looking for a leader, and the founders believe you are to lead yourself under providence or God, right? Not under man. So we got to understand what our kids are receiving by our words and what that means. Like I said before about the Constitution, if we want to protect this document, we must also be very accurate in what it means. So that means we need to study the words. One thing I've done on my website is I've taken 1828 dictionary and basically did a transcription of modern day terms on its philosophies. So I just kind of broken it down, but it wasn't just this is what I thought about it. This is actual definitions, and I put that down there. So it's an easier way, because some of these documents are hard to read sometimes. So the funny thing is, and the sad thing maybe, is that I can read them now and understand them. I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe I have too much time on my name, but now I look at them like, oh, I know exactly what that means or something. So we need to start studying those documents for the words and the context that they were put in. Like I say, words are also very, very powerful. Now, let me tell you something about the Republican Party. I got this book, Why Christians Can't Be Democrat. Like Lewis said, the title alone makes people either like it or hate it. And I struggled over the title for a while, and I decided, you know what, you can't be Christian and Democrat, and so I'm going to leave it like it is. So I came up with this other concept. I'm working on it now, and it's how the Republicans are destroying our republic. So that's going to be another one. That's probably going to have a lot of Democrat sales on it. Playing both sides with it, right? What we have to understand is the perception. We may understand the Constitution, but most people don't read it. I'm going to tell you right now, most black people do not read the Constitution because they told it was not for them. I was told it was not for me. I told it was a document to keep me enslaved. And we familiar with the 3-5 compromise? Yep. They said, Mike, that wasn't for us. It didn't look at us, so we can mishope people. I said, no, it uses the word person. Then I explained what that really means. I was just in Tuskegee not too long ago, and the guy's giving it a tour. And it was like, look, this is what Booker T. Washington did, even when we weren't even viewed as whole people. We would look at 3/5. And I wanted to correct him so bad at that point. I didn't want to interrupt the tour. So I had to write them back and explain what that really means. They need to come to one of my classes. So you got a whole population out there, a whole subset of the population that don't care about this document, because if it's not for you, why should you learn it? Right? So my challenge, I do another class, it's called It Was For Us, and I explain a lot of these documents, and I explain slavery and these misconceptions about different things, because your opinion changes with your understanding and with your knowledge. Right? And if you don't want to understand, your opinion will stay pretty much probably wrong for most of your life. So if we want to protect this document, we got to protect the context also within it. Because like I said before, you don't have to change or amend it. Obama's proven that, right? Because he has a stage, he has a platform, he has some oratory skills, and people believe it, and that document is no good if it's not enforced. If it's not studied, it's not read, okay? So that's some of the reasons we should care about this whole thing, especially for Malachi. Right now, as grown people, we have people going in there looking at people as leaders. Now, another reason it's important is that when you put the responsibility of leadership on the shoulders of those who don't really have it, and because it's your perception, you get disappointed about every 4 years. Because you transfer too much responsibility and burden to those who not only are not supposed to be in that position, but they cannot be, right? By virtue of our type of government. So this is some of the reasons that we should care, did I say should there, about this. And to recap a little bit, leadership can never be forced. The difference between a president and somebody like Moses, in the Bible is going around these decades lost. And imagine if we following Moses. It's like, Moses, I don't want to disrespect you, but I don't think you really know what the promised land is. And me and my group just going to go ahead and bow out. And Moses may say, you know what, Mike, I'm kind of disappointed in that, and I'm pretty close or whatever, but I understand. And I leave his leadership. I'm not threatened. I'm not forced to stay. I will leave. Presidents and government basically writes laws and say you must comply with these under force, even deadly force of guns if need be. And you can switch it out so long every couple of years. We get 2 years to decide how much authority we want in our lives, what level of authority every 2 years. So you can't force somebody to follow you and say, I'm leading you. That's not leadership. So we got to stop watering down the word and applying it to exactly what it really means. And be careful where we give that to. So other people are not leaderships. CEOs are not leaders. They're authority, right? Because if you're in a company and the CEO is dictating to you, you don't have an option to say, no, you can leave the company if that's what you want to do. Or get fired. But the leader is the person that you're willing to follow, not the person you're forced to. So you may have a manager that has leadership skills that motivates you to do what you need to do in the company. I always get burned for this too, but I'm going to say it anyway. Your pastors and your preachers aren't leaders. If Malachi is being forced to go to church and forced to follow all the rules, that's forced, right? Mm-hmm. Now, as parents or adults, we can choose to go there, we can choose whatever. But again, the person that has a title is not necessarily the person leading you, motivating you for action. So another thing I like to play with the concept of leadership and authority. Leadership is authority, but authority is not leadership. Meaning that if you choose someone to be a leader, you are somewhat authorizing them by following them. You're giving them some type of authority. But authority is not leadership. And what do I mean by that? Crossing guards have authority. Are they leaders? You got to get out. Oh, sorry. I may have someone watch my child. I can give them the authority and responsibility of watching my child, but I do not consider the babysitter a leader. Judges have authority. The taxmen have authority, but they're not leaders. See how that works? So it's the difference between authority and leadership. And the founders recognized that government's authority and not leadership. The Bible recognizes government as authority, not leadership. It's all things about authority. And when you give your authority to someone else, your responsibility to someone else, you lose power, you lose authority, you become weaker, you become dependent on that source. So this is why it's important to protect your authority. And in one way the government steals our authority, either it can be by force or really by enticement. They ask for the responsibility, the very responsibility that you're supposed to have, that God has given you. They ask for the responsibility, and when you take responsibility, you take some things with it, right? You take jurisdiction, and you take power. That's how that works. I think that's my last slide. You see right here. Yeah. That's what I have for today. Any questions?
I do have a question. It seems to me, you know, I grew up and was in grade school in the 50s and 60s, and we weren't even taught everything about our Constitution as I have learned as an adult. So it's an educational process.
Oh, yeah.
And unless the teachers are educated in the process and understanding our Constitution, how can the children ever be taught? Unless they're taught at home by their parent.
Yeah, you know, you bring up a really good point. Teaching the responsibility is not, well, teaching the Constitution is not someone else's responsibility. What we've done is we left the interpretation and the teaching and the protection of the Constitution to judges, politicians, and lawyers. They have the interpretation. We the people are the protector of the Constitution, right? So to your point, and what's so sad is most people don't understand this anymore, right? I asked people where their rights come from. They said Constitution. I said, I got a right again to raise my hand. Where is that listed in the Constitution? Oh, it's not. Oh, that must not be my right then. Because they come from God, right? So to your point, no one understands the Declaration anymore in terms of its philosophies. No one understands the Constitution anymore. We're told things so many times, we believe it, and things change over time. So it is our responsibility as parents to teach this. I do what I do to try to educate people because I was not taught this in school. We had a history class that lasted one day. It was more historical. It had nothing to do with the philosophical underneath. It had nothing to do with the application authority.
Absolutely.
Basically, I was told that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. I'm like, wow, what a brilliant man. And I don't take anything away from him because he's like my favorite. He really is. But there's a difference between writing the Declaration and penning the Declaration of Independence, or whatever. So again, the importance of words and how they're received. It's not what you say, it's what people hear. So yeah, we have to do a better job educating the philosophies and what this really meant, because otherwise people are going to look at these documents as just really being antiquated and no relevance. It's like, oh, that was so long ago. It doesn't apply anymore. It has to do, you don't have bayonets and kings or whatever. I'm like, look, human nature never changes. And this document deals with human nature. And therefore, until human nature changes, this document stays relevant. But you have to understand what that document represents, right? More questions? Or comments or jokes? Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, you were talking about, I'm sorry, you're the one that has a hearing problem, not nobody else. But I'll speak later, thank you. We talked about that. I'm a preacher's kid, and my father has been retired for some time, sort of. But he always said that he was the servant. He said, if there's any chief about me, it's chief servant, and I'm down here.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I have a responsibility to make sure God's word is imparted to you and to support you, but I'm not the boss.
Right.
He says God's the boss, and don't ever let anybody know. You know, there's never a question about that. And I see so many churches that fail, so many preachers that go from place to place to place because they want to be the.
You know what? And the congregation allows it too, right? It's human nature to seek leadership. Because a lot of us, we don't want to be educated to deal with life. We just want to entertain our way through it. And so it's easy to put a burden or leadership or responsibility on somebody else. Most people, well, I can't say most people, a lot of people don't want the responsibility that it takes to be independent. Trust me, I got enough relatives and cousins that can back that statement up. See, when you want to be independent, it takes responsibility. And to your point, you know, for your father, I applaud him for that, because most people want to put, again, the pastors in an inferior position above them. Again, they don't understand the difference between, you know, somebody who's teaching, authority, representation, or leadership. They don't understand it anymore. And in a lot of black churches, the pastor's wife is the first lady. And it's funny when you see somebody go to church for the first time and get introduced to the pastor's wife as the first lady. It's almost this inferior bow. Oh, it's the first lady. I'm holding you up high. I'm like, man, I wish you could come to the class, because all you're doing is putting these people above you again. Right? We are supposed to retain the authority and responsibility that God has given us. not just easily give it away. Now, we need government. I always say I'm not anti-government, because we can't teach our kids and work and protect our homes and stuff. It's not enough hours of the day. So we have to delegate some of that responsibility to other people. But when you delegate, which is important, I want to make this talk. When you delegate to somebody, it's important that in order to retain your power, that you have some type of a contract or agreement with them that lists their responsibilities, your jurisdiction, the powers, and how you get your authority back when that relationship ends. That's all our Constitution is. We delegate responsibility to the federal government. We are creating a contract, which is called our Constitution, a social compact. We are giving it its jurisdiction, and we're telling it how the people are going to be elected or selected, and that with the 10th Amendment, anything not mentioned here flows down to the state and the people, right? The Constitution is really a contract. It's one of several protections that we have for us against the federal government or government itself, with the last one being the Second Amendment, right? When all this fails, when the Constitution fails, when separation of power fails, when nullification fails, when succession fails, when we lost our senators to the 17th Amendment, when all these protections they gave us failed to protect our authority from kings or men or tyrants, the last way we can get our authority back is by force. All right, that's why we have a Second Amendment. You know, we all know it's not just for hunting or whatever. It's what happens when you lose all of your authority that God has given you to government or one man. How do you get it back? Because you
Overthrow that government.
yeah, because they're not going to give it back just by asking nicely. So we have to have some means of getting our authority back. This is when all your authority from God transfers to somebody else, and you've lost it because of ignorance or they've taken it. You have to have a way to get it back. But you're absolutely right. We got to understand the hierarchy. There's a difference between hierarchy and authority at the same time. So, any other questions?
Now, you mentioned that you're working on the project, how Republicans are destroying the Republic. I had to laugh at that because I think there's a lot of us here that are here not because we are really excited about the direction of the Republican Party right now. We're here because for too many years we sat around elected Republicans, and now we look at, you know, what too many of them are doing, and we're saying, this is not what I sent you there for.
Right.
You know, we were kind of fat, dumb, and happy, thinking, oh, I'll just vote for the person with an R by their name, and everything will work out all right. You know, you've got, you know, our former presidential candidate calling the people that want to actually defend the Constitution and liberty wacko birds, and you know, that's going for, you know, amnesty for illegal and all that kind of thing. And so why don't you would take a couple minutes and kind of expound on where you're going with that, and I think it might be interesting to hear.
Great question. So here's the thing. Like I said before, I was Democrat because I was told I need to be, I should be, because I'm black. You have Republicans who are Republicans because their parents were Republican. They have no idea what it means. I ask people, Republican, Democrat, whoever, these are two major parties right now, there's other political parties. I'm like, what does that mean? It's like, I don't know. Have you been to the Republican website? Have you been to the Democrat website? No. So what's your understanding of the principles, just from what you get from the media? Pretty much. And what we've done, Lewis, is that dangerous word called association. You have Republican principle, a Republican form of government, and then you have individuals who call themselves Republican. Now, I'm going to go off here a little bit in terms of like religious beliefs or something. Say, for instance, you're Catholic, or you're Muslim, or you're Christian, or whatever it may need to be, and you've bought into that ideology or that belief, and you have a conviction in your heart, that's where you need to be. And you go to church and you realize your pastor's in this big scandal, and it puts a big mark on the church and whatever. Now, that's just a man who is supposed to, or a man or a woman who's supposed to execute on the ideology, and they failed you. Does that make the ideology wrong or any bad at that point? It doesn't change it. That's not the case in government. For whatever reason, we can say, you know what, that pastor did wrong, but I'm still faithful and convicted in my faith, and we're just going to replace that man or that woman. That doesn't happen in politics. We have Republican principles. I believe in Republican principles. Principles came before man, they will be here after us. When 2 cavemen were in the cave, and 2 cavemen walked in, it was 4 cavemen, even before we knew how to add or understood math. Principles always been here before us. So I believe in Republican principles. But in politics, you have a Republican go and say something stupid or mess something up, and all of a sudden, the whole Republican Party, the whole Republican principle is bad. People don't forgive like that. They make an association they don't make with religious things, which I can't understand. I'm still trying to figure that out. But what you eventually effectively have is that you have individuals with the Republican title who don't even know the things that we've discussed today.
So, you're right.
Listen to the radio anywhere today, you have Republicans, you have Democrats. We stick with Republicans. Our leader needs to lead or whatever. They don't know. So you're sending people to represent Republican principles, and they don't even know what Republican principles are. And you have some people, I look at some people who are Democrat, and I'm like, wait a minute, those are Republican principles. You're in the wrong party. You have people who are Republicans, well, those are Democrat principles. You're in the wrong party. Then you got what they call independence before I offend anybody. I don't want to offend anybody. I always, look, I'm going to get back to your point here. This whole thing's about authority, right? God's authority versus man's authority. And when you move from the political right to left, that authority increases to government. On the very, very far right, you have anarchy, meaning no authority of government. On the very, very far left, you have totalitarianism. I think I said that right. I think it's like 12 syllables or something. You have complete authority under man. So all of these, and because every political party has to operate out of force to govern, all these parties operate off of some type of force. The question is how much force each party wants to bring. Because with every responsibility you give it, there's also more force, right? Because government has to grow. When your responsibility grows, your authority grows. That means the government force grows. The only difference between a Republican Party, whether conservatives, Republicans, Libertarian, Democrat, Socialists, Communists, or whatever, is how much authority is retained in the hands of man versus God, or the people. That's the only difference, right? So, understanding that if you're independent and you're giving consent to one party who wants more responsibility over the people, meaning more force, and then you give some consent to another party who's saying, I want the responsibility to be within the hands of the people, and you give that to both sides, you just basically contradicted yourself. So I feel like independents really don't understand what they're doing anyway. And the way a system of government is set up is that even if you give your vote either way, it has to be a certain vote or amount of people in each party, in the Senate and House of Representatives to pass it anyway. So you're just kind of wasting your vote. But to your point, and I want to go back to with how the Republicans are destroying our republic. If you give Republicans, hopefully you get this point. If you don't, ask me again, I want to say it a different way. If Republicans, you want self-responsibility, and you want to retain your independence in your leadership and your authority and jurisdiction, the moment you call the president a leader, what that says is, what you're advertising to the world is, this man is our leader. Therefore, we are his followers. And then you go vote against that very man that you just called a leader. You've just became an instructionist. Because people are saying, especially the Democrat Party, saying, wait a minute, Lewis, you just said he's a leader. Why don't you let him lead? If he's your leader and you've said that, then why are you getting in the leader's way? Of course he can't lead because you're getting in his way. This is exactly what's happening. So you have all these Republicans going out here and saying, he's our leader, government's leader, and then refusing to let them lead. What message does that send to the people? It's exactly what they use, and so they can use that against us. And that's what I'm talking about, how the Republicans are destroying the republic. It's not because we don't understand, it's because we don't understand perception and the power of words. And Obama will get out there, and I won't pick on Obama, but he understands the power of words, right? I had an example of some words. Oh, You have one side saying illegal aliens. And you have the other side saying undocumented workers. Now, to the person, I got a son who's 21, he's pretty much oblivious to what I'm talking about. He thinks I'm crazy. So, you know, like I guess like most kids or something, their parents are crazy. To my son, what sounds better? Illegal alien? Or somebody, he just want to work, he just doesn't have documentation. Illegal alien sounds like, ooh, he's an alien, he's illegal. See, it's all about perception of our words. What we try to do, another concept in the book is, everyone is emotional, but not everyone is logical. So Republicans, we try to appeal to the logic where everyone don't have it. Common sense is not commonly divided. So the Democrats say, you know what? We may have some smart people out there, but you know what? Everybody's emotional. Let's hit them on the emotional level because everyone's emotional. So they reach the mind through the heart. We try to reach the heart through the mind. And we get out there and it's a losing battle. So again, I'm not one to say it's wrong. I'm saying understand perception, how things are perceived. It used to be, if we all went back to like a couple of 100 years, it would be no problem because everybody would understand the definitions, the true context of the words. They understand how authority works, how it flows. They lived under the tyranny of kings. They would get it, but we're so far away from that now. We have to change the tactics. Doesn't mean you abandon the principle. It means you change the perception of how you get there.
Talking about words, I've just spent 2 weeks at Mercer. Great books seminar, which we studied some documents like you were just talking about, the Declaration of Independence and so forth. And the whole precept of this particular methodology of teaching, which is Socratic method, is that we are in a group and we've read the text, and then the leader of that group will pose a question, and then it's open for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at the documents, not what we think about them, but what are they saying, which gives an opportunity for all the students to be able to express, talk, and think about what they're saying, not, okay, on page 77, this says this, now this is what you're supposed to know.
Yeah.
Which too many history teachers are doing, this is what you need to know, according to their particular disposition, and usually, unfortunately, in our public school system is liberal.
Yeah.
So I'm conservative and like, I don't care. I teach English, and that's the method I'm going to be using, is because it lets them talk about what the words say, not what I say.
Yeah. It goes back to, again, if you really want to understand what was being said, you translate it into language, or you study the language that was written in.
Well, what worries me is the education of the children, and that today, and you know, here in Georgia, they've adopted Common Core.
Right.
And I don't know how many people have seen what the social studies and the civics curriculum is, but there is nothing in it that calls our form of government a constitutional republic. It only talks about being a democracy. And that's what they're going to be taught. Is that we are a democracy, which is mob rule.
Yeah. So that's another word. I have some words, and I think it's on that actual piece of paper there. If you look on that paper, I think I put that most people think we're a democracy instead of. So when I go and speak to people and challenge that we're not a democracy, just because, again, human nature, because the majority of the people in the room say we're a democracy, Mike, you must be wrong. That's exactly what's happening, right? So again, if you allow people and say, be nice about it in the way you correct them, but if you continue to let people call them leaders and that we're a democracy and the president is our leader and the head of government, if you allow that, you're contributing to it. Because what ends up happening is that everyone thinks the majority of people believe we're a democracy, and then when we come and say we're a constitutional republic, we look like fools. Because they're going to say, nah, look at all these people can't be wrong. It's you.
But
so here's the thing.
Tell a lie long enough, people will believe it.
So, yeah. But they say the truth gets around the world, what, like twice or something, or 10 times before, the lie gets around the world so many times before the truth can get his pants on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's the funny thing. I study all different types of things, oppositions or whatever, because I want to bridge the gap and understand what people are saying. So I read Obama's Audacity of Hope. Because that's the funny thing. This man is really brilliant. He lists in that about us being a republic. So he knows we're a republic. But what does that get him? So he says democracy all the time. And then when I ask my Democrat friends who are big Obama supporters, no matter what, have you read his book? Have you studied anything? I think no. So he's clear about what type of government we have. But it doesn't, if he's looking for authority, like if I go out there on a campaign trail and really talk about what I'm talking about, I look like a fool for the most part. So my whole thing is to educate enough people where if I decide to, run for office, we'll have some kind of support or whatever. But if I can get out there and say, we're Republic, Constitutional Republic, and Second Amendment, blah blah, I look like a fool because our nation has become too ignorant. We've become too busy to learn how to stay free. That's what it's come down to.
Well, my point is, we need to start paying attention to what's happening to the education of the children, because they're our future.
So let me address that real quick and show you how really messed up this thing is. So, education, you have a right to pursue an education, but you don't have a right for it to be paid for. But now, the government says education is a right. And when you make something a right, and now it's enforced by laws, it puts the responsibility, authority, jurisdiction, and power in the hands of government. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now, right? We're going to tell you where your kid's going to go to school, what they're going to be taught, who's going to teach them, and we're going to make you pay for it. And we've allowed that to happen. So this is just a continuation of a direction for more things to come. Until we understand that the government works for us, we don't work for the government. I had a meeting with my son's counselor last year. It was obvious the woman thought because of her position, because of all of her doctorates or whatever, that she knew best for me and my son. And she was kind of condescending in her tone to me. And so again, I separate the title from the hierarchy. Like, you know what? I don't think you understand that you work for me. See, I pay your salary, you don't pay mine. That's how you know who works for who, right? Who signs the checks, right? So we know the government. That's another good point. We know the president is not our CEO or leader or whatever because we pay him.
Unless you're on welfare.
Yeah, but we still pay on the welfare, right? It just kind of funnels through the government. It's still, all the resources still come from us. But yeah, to your point, this is exactly what's happening. So I have, I'm trying to get a curriculum together, whatever, so I can teach this to younger kids. But it's probably not going to happen in public schools, right? We all familiar with, Neil Gorsuch's phrase, the government school is, other government by the government, paid by the government, the teachers work for the government, it's funded by the government, it tells you. So people are going to come out there, they're not going to come out anti-government. The government's my friend. I hear it all the time. So, yeah, to your point, we have to educate our kids. We have to use, teach them what these documents really meant. They're not antiquated. They deal with human nature. They always will be relevant. Understand them how, contracts work and things like that. So, yes, sir.
My question is, like people in this room, we go to seminars, workshops, and we do a lot of reading, okay? And we're educating ourselves in what you're telling us. However, and then there's another issue too about God, but let me address that secondly. So, how do we go about? I know you said we have to inform other people, but when you talk to someone that's apathetic, ignorant to what is really happening, forgetting about the Constitution right now, but what's happening right now in our world. They're living in la la land, and then you discuss something and they think you're a conspirator, you're anti-government, and you voice your opinion and try to educate them, but they're unwilling to be educated. And the thing about God, where God derives all power, gives us the power. We have so many families here in Bartow, in the United States, in which the families don't go to church. They don't receive any instruction in terms of God. of religious instruction, regardless of the religion of your choice. So it becomes even more and more difficult. They don't have that knowledge, you know?
Yeah.
But
Okay,
they vote.
But
I
they
have a
vote.
solution for
Yeah.
that, right? When I talk about, like I mentioned to you guys before, I focus on the concept of government. Government was here before politics. Government's a concept of nature. We all govern. We can govern ourselves under God, or we can govern by man. But when I talk about government, people, because being dumbed down, think I'm automatically talking about politics. And once they feel like you're talking about politics, they run and scatter like roaches, right? So I don't address or approach anyone from a political standpoint. I don't talk about Barack or Mitt Romney or, you know, political things, because most people feel like it's just people just want to argue. We got no other thing to do, right? So here's a trick. For those who believe in God, you address them from that level, not a political level. And it's like a little trick. You know, in my book, first thing I ask you is, what is God to you? So you can define what God is to you. And then I use that to say, well, if you said God's your provider, then why does the government give you something? If you said God is your leader, then why are you being led by this person? So I make them, or have them identify and then challenge them on these things that they say they believe in and they're doing something different. Okay, so from those who believe in God, you can address it from there initially. Don't talk about politics, talk about the word, right? And then from there you can branch out to government. For those who don't believe in God, it's a simple question. It always works. Because they want to be political sometimes. Ask them this. I don't know how you all determine who you vote for. See, I don't need to read all the bills and understand all the speeches. I don't really need all of that. The question I go, ask somebody, okay, let me ask you this question. If I vote for you in your policies, sticking on you for a second. If I vote on you in your policies, and your policies pass, I got a question for you. Do I retain authority to make a decision in my life, or do you?
Depends on what policy.
It's bottom line. God gave me the authority, and if your policy is going to take my authority on my decisions in my life, I probably won't vote for you. Or do you let me retain authority? Do you get to pick where my kids go to school, or do I get to pick where my kids go to school? I don't need all of the garbage in between. Who owns the authority, jurisdiction, power, and responsibility if this thing gets passed? Because our system of government is supposed to protect us, protect our responsibilities, authority, jurisdiction, and power, not take it away. So to that point, to your point, sir, for those who don't believe in God, you just have a question. You talk about some school choice or something like that, and you put it in a way to say, wait a minute, they've passed, they get to pick where your kids go to school. And you're going to have some people who feel, I know people right now who feel the government is best for them, so they said the government knows best. So you're going to have those people who say the government knows best, so I'm going to let the government know. They got all the answers, they got all the research, and you're going to just have some of those people. But sometimes, I'm talking to a guy right now, I work with this guy, I've only known him for a couple of weeks. He's from India, and he's atheist. And I asked him for certain policy, because he asked me about certain things. I'm like, you know what, at the end of the day, do they get the power over your life, or do you retain it? And he woke up that quick. I don't have to talk about God anything, because he realizes he wants to make the decision in his life. But what it is with politics and all the fluff, that gets lost in the translation. We really don't know at the end. Does that make sense? So yeah, don't try to reach people on a political level unless you know they're political. Understand them from a very, very basic of who gets the authority, who retains the authority, me or you. And if you get it, you better give me a really good reason why you should have it. Okay. Thank you very much.